Wanted to take this occasion to actually introduce the work of School of Community that we are going to do for the next 5 months, and to highlight some of the most key issues, some of the key questions that we have that Father Julian is actually introducing to us during these months, which it tends to be and is always the role of the beginning day. The beginning day, by definition, is that moment in the year in which the work of School of Community is introduced by doing two things: reflecting where we are. Usually that's what David de Prosperi does. What are the questions that we have? What have we learned to this point? And what questions do we have for now? How, as a community, we are actually growing in awareness. And we grow in the awareness of who we are, what we are, who we are, to whom do we belong, by engaging at multiple levels. So like through the work of the School of Community, through the things that happen to us, etc. So I wanted to begin by highlighting what is this point that Father Julian is making. Where have we arrived? The question can be synthesized, summarized in the last contribution that David de Prosperi gave, the last thing that he says. And I'm going to read it to you. Life becomes useful when it becomes obedience. Ultimately, it is an openness to the presence of Christ, a yielding to the greatness that another wants to achieve in you and for you, for the world, in a way that is perhaps different from how you would have it. We live so that Christ may be acknowledged everywhere. We live for the human glory of Christ. And Davide asks this question to Father Caron. How can we help each other to live the awareness of this dependence? This is the question that should actually frame all of our work during these next few months. How are we helped to live the awareness of our dependence? Therefore, the word dependence, to depend, is absolutely critical. Father Caron, in the beginning day, delved into what this dependence looks like. One of the ways that I summarized it, that it was useful to me, is that we have easily reduced or passed from an enthusiasm for a presence to a position that is defined by cultural translation. It's fancy to say we no longer depend on a relationship with another, but we depend as belonging to a club. He says two things. If we do not live everything that is given to us as a cry that reminds us of the memory of Christ, I think that this is the provocation. If we don't live everything that is given to us as a cry that reminds us of the memory of Christ, nothing we do we will be able to satisfy and give us the gladness we desire. And the event that shook us will deteriorate into things to do. And he later says, when Christianity therefore becomes a conception, a doctrine, a way of conceiving and dealing with life, Christianity becomes ideology. This, quoting Father Giussani, was the objection to the situation of the Church in modern time that Giussani highlighted. The way of conceiving of morality was not born of the event of Christ. It was practically devitalized as when you remove the nerve from a tooth. That is, and this is something that Father Julian said when he was here for the tour of Disarming Beauty, as if we got married out of love for another, and we clean the plates, and we wash the plates, and we clean the room, and we do everything that we do for love of another. But as time passed by, we started doing things because that's what you do since you are married. But we didn't get married to wash the plates, to care of the house, or to live with another person. We've lost this sense of our ontological dependence from another. We live as if depending was more an obstacle than the fulfillment of our person. And when we talk about depending, belonging to another, we most of the time talk about doing certain things, but not this relationship with the other. This is the heart of what Father Julian is calling us to consider. The second part of the beginning day, he speaks about how can we avoid that everything is crystallized, that everything is without life, like a tooth that doesn't have the nerve anymore. How can we actually rediscover the beginning? Live our life beginning from the event as the point of departure. And he says one thing and comments in two ways. He says the event can be the point of departure if it is happening now, if it has an impact in my life, if it changes me, if it moves me. If it is not happening now, then I live as if I already know everything and I act accordingly. And he uses this sentence: what is at stake is a question of conversion towards Christ. So how can we help each other to live the awareness of this dependence? How can we convert towards Christ? Start from the event as the point of departure. He says one thing: to adhere to the history through which he has reached us. The journey forward requires adhering like children to the story of God in our life. The event of Christ endures throughout history and makes itself visible today through our companionship, the place where this presence exists. This adhering to the history is obviously not it is through the particular circumstances. You do School of Community, you participate to the things that our community, our companionship indicates. But it's not enough, because he's inviting us to go deeper than just a formal belonging. And he insists that we actually live this verification of this dependence by looking at our experience, by using the symptoms, paying attention to what reality provokes in us. And I would like to highlight this aspect here. Not to what happens in us or to happens around us, but to what reality provokes in us. The symptoms that we sense in ourselves. The journey is simple. As this friend writes, I realize that the more I take seriously the working hypothesis that the movement proposes, the more I see things around me differently, more deeply, in a true way. So connect this to the question at the beginning. In order to help one another to live the awareness of our ontological dependence, that it is another who makes me, that life is for this other who is the mystery, who's God, I need to depend on the working hypothesis that is being given to me and test and see what happens when I follow. Caron ends the beginning day by saying, I am curious to see what creativity will flow from the recovery of the beginning if we accept Father Giussani's invitation, and how we will respond to the need we find in our various spheres of activity. The work of the next 5 months, as it was introduced to us during this time in the beginning day, is to actually delve and deepen our understanding of what depending means. Not intellectually, but experientially. Beyond the formalism, which tends to be the way in which we most of the time belong to an association or a group. The work of the School of Community is on chapter 8 of Why the Church. And on this chapter in particular, Don Giussani delves into this divine in the church. I'm going to propose, following Father Caron's indication, to work on pages 163 to 179 for the next 5 to 6 weeks. I want to highlight the 4 key points of this chapter. Before I highlight these 4 key points, I want to give one brief note of method. I think that this chapter and the things that Caron said at the beginning day are absolutely critical for us as good Americans, because there is nothing more anti-American than to depend. And therefore, we have a strong tendency to read the School of Community, avoiding that is not familiar to us. Therefore, it's easy for us to read the beginning day and the School of Community, highlighting those things that are familiar to my way of thinking. But what Father Caron is asking us to do is to change the way we think. This beautiful sentence of, is a question of a conversion towards Christ. That my fulfillment is in my depending, in the awareness of my depending, is foreign to us. So as a note of method, it's absolutely critical that we read the School of Community with this awareness, looking for something that is profoundly human and therefore resonates with me, and at the same time is foreign in my experience. Otherwise, we risk, because of our experience in life, to reduce the proposal of the School of Community to a sentimentalism. When we hear the words of Galatians 2:20, it is not I, but you that live in me, that is, that the life of my life is yours, that is given to me. These words are a great provocation to the way in which we think of ourselves, 99% of the time. We think of ourselves as in construction. Therefore, the School of Community, and this chapter in particular, offers something that is unfamiliar and therefore difficult to wrap my head around. Not because it is theological, but because it is often foreign to my normal experience, even though it resonates profoundly with my human experience. What are the points that I would highlight of this chapter? I will send you the PDF with these notes that I have in front of me so that you have them and you can use them in whatever form you choose to. And I split the work of this month in 5 pieces. So I'll make one comment per piece. The chapter opens saying this: the church communicates truth don't turn things around. The church claims that the mystery of our faith, the mysteries of our faith, Father Giussani in this chapter is going to talk about all of the dogmas and all of the mysteries of the faith. It's very interesting because immediately for us, these are truths that I intellectually can understand, that some theologians actually talk about it, but it's difficult for me to understand what they are for. Giussani says, the church claims that the mysteries of our faith hold the ultimate meaning of my existence. So what we are reading during this next month claims to be the ultimate meaning of my existence in very practical ways. It says it's not an abstract formulation, but something pertinent to the root of every man's existence, explaining and clarifying his ultimate meaning. And he gives 2 examples. The Trinity. What do we learn? What does it mean? What does it say? What does it reveal of my existence? The mystery of the Trinity. He says that God is both one and in communion. That I cannot understand myself if not in relationship with another. The relationship formula between the I and the you, between a man and a woman, between parents and their children. No analysis by power of reason alone can ever explain this paradoxical nature of the one and the many, which is man's experience. He says, I never say the word I so intensely, never perceive the unity of my own identity with the same passion as when I say you. Or when with the same love with which he says, I say you, I say we. Think about how much of a provocation, I'm not going to comment on these things, this means to us. The fact that my fulfillment as a person exists only in the possibility of saying you to another. And then he says the incarnation, the place in which is revealed to us that everything has value for eternity, that nothing falls into oblivion, that everything is unified. As you will see through the dogmas, surprisingly, these things that are perceived for us in a very theoretical and abstract way speak deeply of my human existence and the meaning of it. Lately in the chapter, second point, he speaks about how do I acquire this sense of existence. How do I arrive to understand the ultimate meaning of my existence? And he uses one expression, by osmosis. And we will spend 1 week working on this. By osmosis. That is, by remaining within, by living within the ecclesial community. These truths penetrate the membrane of our consciousness day by day in an incalculable way, enabling us to attain that certainty and clarity of truth which we need to face life. Through fidelity to the ecclesial community, through the very life of the community, the message comes to pass. Then again, he's saying that in order for me to understand who I am, in order for me to understand and live the meaning of my existence, I need to be with, to belong. Often in our belonging, as we heard in the beginning day, our belonging often is formal or is of our own choosing. We choose when and how we belong. Perverting a sense of freedom, perverting it because, of course, it is my freedom that says yes to this belonging. But perverting it in the sense that we don't accept the challenge that is given to us, that it is independent in giving yourself fully to another, that you understand who you are. The life of a community, the life of the church as a whole, the life of a person grows in awareness over time. This is the reason why Father Giussani will speak about how the dogma is the expression of the conscience of the church. It's not an invention of the theologian. And why we have a beginning day. And why we have then the spiritual exercises. Why do we have beginning points, stopping? Because we are growing in our awareness. And why, as a community, we should also have this sense of, have we grown in our awareness? The third point, a very interesting one, is the problem of authority. In the life of the church about the communication of the truth, authority is like a channel, like a riverbed with a twofold function. The first is an ideal function, a function whereby the church indicates the direction of the river. In the second, the church, the limits, like a riverbank, it must judge when a statement or a teaching goes against or beyond the flow. This is absolutely critical for us because authority, meaning the relationship between freedom and dependence, plays an absolutely important role in our lives. Who is authority for us? What does it mean to follow an authority? The first authority that we have in our companionship is Father Carron. How is what is said help us to grow in our faith? And what do we do when we don't understand? It's interesting because Giussani says in this particular chapter, in this particular section, a second way for the truth of the faith to be communicated in the church is through the teachings of the extraordinary magisterium, through an authority that we follow. And it is with that authority that we can grow. So the dependence we're speaking about is very concrete, is very invasive for us, because we see authority and freedom as against each other. The final point that I would like to highlight is what I mentioned just briefly, is that the church in fact is alive, as the Why of the Church book started. And it is so easy to miss this point. It is the life of one, the mystery of the person in Christ, that develops through time within the living organic nature of his people. It is through life that we grow in the awareness and in familiarity with the mystery. with the one that we love. Think about the sentence of the beginning day. If we do not live everything that is given to us as a cry that reminds us of the memory of Christ, nothing we do will be able to satisfy. And therefore, as we live life, this memory of Christ, this familiarity with Him grows over time. And this familiarity grows in the form of awareness. And this is personal as it is communal. Every time that we get together as an assembly, the assembly is a point of awareness. It's not people asking or saying things one-on-one or the people can hear you. But it's truly the work of a communion desirous of understanding more. To facilitate the work of School of Community during these next 5 months, with the National Diaconia, we have chosen to actually take the challenge that Father Carron in particular is given this time, and instead of just giving a quick guide of how to split, we've decided to give you, to try to identify what are the themes, what are the questions that we have to tackle, that we have to answer personally and as a community. So what experience of awareness of dependence do we have? What are we learning of ourselves by being with the other? I would like also to, and I will send you this, I chose 5 pages of the book of the life of Don Giussani that mirror some of these things that can accompany the reading of the Why the Church. Not as something to also read for School of Community, but something that can actually give you a better, more color to it, because some of the statements are so powerful and so deep that can be also, and we are so unfamiliar with them, that maybe hearing some of the stories can help us understand better. The other thing that I wanted to, as a note of method, I wanted to propose to all of you. I was particularly struck by how at the end of the beginning day, Father Carron insisted in 2 things: silence and singing. Even yes, and I was thinking, I have a proposal for you, but just to give you also a sense of what it means what it means for me to follow. The fact that Father Carron makes those comments there invites me, and therefore I invite you, to actually pick up the invitation and therefore convert, change something. With regards to silence, I would propose to you to say your evening prayer at the end of the day, before you go to work, before you leave work, and to read the School of Community at that moment. It takes a total of 15 minutes every day. It's a very concrete proposal. And in the proposal itself is also an invitation to all of you to verify whether depending is better or not. So in itself, the proposal is not only to help you understand better the text, but it is essential for you to actually grasp a glimpse of what is said on those pages. Otherwise, we can talk about that we learn the meaning of existence by osmosis, but if we don't feel the osmosis, it's more difficult. So I would propose to you that every day, before you leave work, or before you take a break during the day, you do your evening prayer and you read your School of Community. The second thing, with regards to the singing, in the same way I would propose to you that we begin the School of Community singing one or two songs. Knowing what the School of Community is about, I hope that this summary helps you to identify what songs are worth singing. If singing is absolutely impossible because the makeup of the school, then start with evening prayer. That is, start the work of School of Community with an invitation to communion through singing, and if singing is not possible, with evening prayer. The second thing to this, join the choir. If you have the time, join the choir. To understand what it means to follow, to depend in a particular history, to me means that indications that are given during a regular life, like for example the end of the beginning day, are meaningful, meaning are an invitation to a personal conversion. Now, we all have our lives, and maybe we cannot all join the choir. So we'll sing during School of Community. Or maybe this conversion to a greater familiarity with Christ, this attempt to understand better what it means to depend, you will see it in different ways. But to depend, to follow, requires naturally, for me, the desire to move. Without this dimension, we will never know what depending means, and therefore we will never know what the meaning of our existence is. We will be able to actually have examples, intellectual ones, but not the ones that actually will carry you through the difficult moments of life. I read, to conclude, again, the provocation that Davide Prosperi gave to open the beginning day with. Life becomes useful when it becomes obedience. We all have to deal with this question. When in 5 weeks or 6 weeks we get together for an assembly, we have to deal with this question. Is it true or not? We have to verify whether this is true or not. Life becomes useful when it becomes obedience. Ultimately, it is an openness to the presence of Christ, a yielding to the greatness that another wants to achieve in you, a yielding to the greatness that another wants to achieve in you and for you, for the world, in a way that is perhaps different from how you would have it. Therefore, the question is, how can we help each other to live the awareness of this dependence?